The Historical Society of Quincy and Adams County was formed in 1896, which was, I think, if I count right, 8 years later. And when they formed, they didn't have a place. They met in the Young Men's Christian Business Offices room, and they didn't have a place to keep the artifacts and relics that they were being given. So they made a deal with the brand new Quincy Public Library, Free Public Library and Reading Room, to keep those things they were presented with here in this very building. 1896, the year the Historical Society was formed, and it was one of these two corner rooms up here on the second floor that became the relic room. And if you look at the early newspapers, they actually give you a list of the relics that were in that relic room. Now, one of those rooms, which is also called the secret room for a reason that I haven't figured out yet, is the Edward Everett Gallery. The other one, the other room here on the northeast corner that I want to definitely give you a chance to get a peek at, we won't have time to discuss it in depth. We're calling the interactive room right now. It's called the fountain room, and here's a fountain. And this is a room that looks out onto the square. Window onto the square. It's a sponsored, a member and board member and his family, his and her family, sponsored this interactive video. I won't start it because it gets a little dizzying, but we look at Quincy architecture, entertainment downtown, commerce on the square, and one of my favorite spots here is looking at the, what I call Hotel Square over here, the site of the Quincy House, and then the Newcomb, and then here's Judge Bob Cook's watercolor of the Newcomb, and here it is burning in 2013.
I do want to recommend once the museum is open for regular business hours, do come in and check out this window onto the square. Shows you this very view from different points in history. Very much love this exhibit. It's one of the newer ones in the building, so check it out. But we're going to go out into the stained glass gallery now and learn a little bit more about this amazing act of preservation.
This room, as I understand it from the floor plans of the library building, was the reading room. And there are some wonderful photographs of ladies in long skirts and white, all in white with big picture hats, sitting at tables, and the sign says, "Please talk only in a whisper." The architecture of the room is magnificent, including the ceiling, which is original to the building. The lighting, of course, is museum lighting now, but the fireplace is no longer working, but it gives us a beautiful, open, soaring space to do our exhibits. And I must say, it's a beautiful place for chamber concerts, and we've had at least one wedding up here too. And we had a delightful your annual meeting.
Yes, that's right.
Up here. It was really delightful. The stained glass collection is, for the most part, well, actually, completely from the collections of the Gardner Museum of Architecture and Design. We have altered it a bit, and I'd like to talk to you about some of the real jewels of this collection. The museum, the Gardner Museum, concentrated on those pieces from Quincy and the surrounding area, and particularly from buildings, both commercial and church, that are no longer here. These three windows that we have before us in light boxes were originally in this corner room, just hanging in the windows. And we asked that Jacksonville Stained Glass restore them, and they actually were excited to do it. They represent a range of the most famous, long-lived stained glass companies in America, and also in Europe. The one here on the left, and please forgive us, we've got one light out in the corner here. This is by Tiffany Studios, and it's part of a memorial window from the First Union Congregational Church at 12th and Maine, and it is typical of Tiffany in that it has a range of glass, pebbled glass, and marbled glass. And when this window was hanging out there in that corner room, it sort of looked like this half over here that doesn't have light right now. You could tell there was some green and there was some yellow, but when Ron Weaver restored it, he found that typical of Tiffany was plated glass, layered glass. If he wanted a particular effect of light and color, he would sandwich several layers of glass. Well, over time, those collected dust, probably coal dust also, and dulled the window down. So if you look at the top of this sort of stylized cathedral scene, you can see the brilliance of that yellow that's coming out now. And also the modeling and marbling of some of the other glass. The middle window here, which I have many favorites, but it's one of my favorites, is called, has two names, St. James of Ulm or The Craftsman, and it was done by Land Studios. Two brothers began Land Studios out of New York, I think, or New Jersey, and it was one of the premier American stained glass manufacturers for most of the 19th century and into the 20th century. This particular window was actually designed by a woman named Catherine Lamb Tate, who was a granddaughter of one of the founders. She became a very famous stained glass delineator, and the original of this window is called the Frolic Memorial Window, and it's called the Craftsman because the central figure, who's St. James, is the so-called patron saint of church decoration. And you will see at intervals up on both sides of the central figure, the roundels celebrate the crafts that are involved in church decoration, including woodworking and marble and stone and decoration, metalwork, lighting, mosaics, stained glass, painting. And if you look at the robes in particular, I find just the deep jewel colors that are in this window are just extraordinary. And the rather flat painting, there are a number of different styles that I won't try to explain it in the short time that we have. But two of the things that I like about this, these jewels in his robe, if you touch them, they're actually chipped. They're rough chipped.
See if I can get a little.
But they have a
texture
to them. And then another technique that was that Lamb Tate liked to use was depth of glass. And so the pants here are a wonderful example. This edge is maybe, an eighth, a quarter of an inch. This is way up to a half an inch. So if you touch it, and I do encourage people to touch it when they come in, you can see the depth and you can see how it changes actually the color that's showing up on the gentleman's pants.
It's very cool. Ask your questions if you have them, guys. I know we got a lot of people tuning in, so please ask if you have them.
The third window here, the third studio, is from the Meyer studio. The Franz Meyer Glassworks began in Munich. They then expanded to shops in New York, and let's see, I'm blanking on the third one.
Chicago.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll find it. Thank you. It was hidden. This window actually has a signature here of Franz Meyer, the mark of Franz Meyer. A very different style, a much flatter, less, more stylized, sort of maybe a Gothic Renaissance style, and a very different painting style, less of the vividly colored and transparent glass, and more of the probably enamel painted glass. This is the scene of the Annunciation, and what's unique about this window is it's hinged here in the middle, and that's because it was a salesman's sample. Franz Meyer shipped literally boatloads of glass here to the United States for churches and commercial buildings. So this would have come as, I can just imagine the salesman coming in with his really heavy grips and pulling out these windows and saying, well, now would you like one of these? Or I can give you a set of these scenes from the life of Mary, or these scenes from the life of Christ. And he folds them up and he puts them away and he sends whatever they ordered. And this window, which to me is one of the most spectacular, probably the most spectacular window we have, and we've come at exactly the right time. This is called Christ at the Door. It's an allegorical scene, and it is, we have down here the dedication. It's from the United Universalist Church in Macomb, Illinois, and it was dedicated to the Penroses, William and Matilda. And then just above it, you see the signature. And this is actually, from what I've been able to find out, fairly rare in windows, that the signature of the makers is on the window in script. It says H.H. Hoffman, Delineer, and then the H.M. Hooker Company of Chicago, 1906. Hoffman was a German painter, and this figure, in fact, this figure, even with the vegetation to the side, the central figure, was one of his scenes of the life of Christ.
Someone wants to know about the scale of this. Do you know how tall it is?
Oh, I've only guessed, what, 18 feet?
I was going to say at least 20 feet. It is enormous, guys. It's
and it
gorgeous. I'm going to back up so you can see it. Yeah, she can be a scale, right?
The wall, by the way, was built around it, so it was moved here, and I can only imagine what that process took. And then the wall was built to hold it. There is plethora of glass styles here. There's pebbled glass, there's marbled glass, there's painted glass, but really, and then of course painting on the glass. But the most spectacular part of it, to me, I think, are the robes of Christ. And when Ron came over to evaluate our windows, he told me about the process of making that. That's called drapery glass, and it's also opalescent. And once again, I encourage visitors to come up and touch these robes, because there's variation in the thickness of the glass, where you see a fold. That's actually a thicker piece of glass. So this glass was hand blown, it was laid out, and then manipulated with rods to create the folds that were going to go into those garments. And this was done with such care, individual pieces, that if you look, for instance, at Christ's right arm, where he's knocking on the door, at his elbow, the folds that are in that sleeve are very natural to what would happen if you crooked your arm and put it up to knock on a door. Likewise, where his robe is pulled in at his belt there, his gold belt, those folds are perfectly modeled to show how his robe would have pulled in at the waist and then opened up again below.
It's just glowing this time of day. We did come in a nice time of day for it.
Yes, it's and if you have a proper light on it in the evening, it's also really, really spectacular. There's painting on the window, as you can see, the vegetation, and it's full of allegorical symbolism, which I'm not sure that I understand at all, and I'm not sure that the art critics agree on the symbolism of color, of plant, of the curls and trifolds and images that are in those windows.
Someone asked what church this was hanging at.
The United Universalist Church in Macomb, Illinois.
Okay.
And we did have a gentleman come in who was from Minneapolis, or not sure the
It's actually a picture of it here.
city, And he said that they also had a window very similar to this that was Christ at the door. And I know that it's a fairly popular, well, I shouldn't say fairly popular, it is a popular
motif
image for church windows. The rest of the room is mostly, well, all of the pieces are from the Quincy area. The window here at the back of the room, I'll point out briefly because I want to briefly have time to explore the Edward Everett Gallery with Reg. This is from the Vermont Street Baptist Church, and it is, we believe it's the earliest colored church glass, colored glass from a church here in Quincy. This church was begun in 1857 at 7th at Vermont, and it lasted until I think it burned, and I want to say 1857, I think. And I'm not sure about the dates, but it is a very simple style with painted glass. Even these colors are probably done by an enamel paint that then is baked into the glass. And this window is our most delicate piece in the exhibit right now. You can see the belly here as it's bowing out. This really needs restoration, and we very much want to be able to restore such a rare and significant piece of Quincy history, church history.
And that's true of a lot of these churches no longer exist, or sometimes had fires or different things. And this was a preservation when this was the Architecture Museum. So something really near and dear to Arts Quincy's past too. Is there any other ones you want to talk about?
I think I would rather just pass you on to Reg because he's got such wonderful things to say about the Edward Everett Gallery, which I'm also very excited about. But please, if you have questions about the churches or about the styles of the windows or about what we know about the history of the various windows, don't hesitate to ask us because, as you can tell, we love a mystery and we love looking for answers to those mysteries and learning more things all the time about these windows.
And we will keep you updated on the status of the museum and the hours that, and maybe the groups that will be allowed as we begin reopening here too on Arts Quincy's page, and of course Historical Society of Quincy and Adams County's page as well. So thank you very much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
And we're going to go into the Edward Everett Gallery now with Mr. Reg Ankrum. This is something that is new within the last 3 or 4 years, I think, and a really neat piece. Good morning, Reg. So tell us about where we're standing.
Well, welcome to the Edward Everett Gallery at the History Museum. Swing around here because I'm going to show you Edward Everett. This is Edward Everett of Quincy in later life. He came here at the age of 22. He, with his family, his father, his parents were merchants. They had a general store on the east side of the square and had that for several years. Edward Everett himself considered himself a mechanic and an engineer, not an artist. But what his legacy is these great pieces of art that have returned to Quincy, that are scenes of Quincy when he was here. His art really started at this location, which is in Nauvoo, and that was the first Mormon temple built in Nauvoo. It was the one that was burned during the Mormon Wars of the mid-1840s, 1845 and 46. And Everett, of course, was involved in that. He was a member of the Quincy Rifles, which was a voluntary military force, and he became part of the unit of John Hardin from Jacksonville, who was a general, and would interestingly become associated once again with John Hardin several years later during the Mexican War. We'll get to that in a moment. The pieces you see were actually lost to Quincy many years ago, and they made their way from Quincy to Galesburg to the East Coast, where someone found them a few years ago, and we were able, as a historical society, to bring them back to Quincy, which is really where they belong. Edward Everett, as I say, was a mechanic and an engineer. In fact, his business was right down the street here at 169 Main Street, which is on the other side of the street, right near the river. Of course, that would have been important because that's where steamboats and also then railroad cars and trains landed. So his business was there. And in later life, he actually built a company to build and fabricate buggies and surreys and that sort of thing. So he's a very active guy. A lot like John Wood, who founded Quincy. He was eclectic, he was a businessman, he was an investor, he loved farming, and of course we can see some of the evidence of that in Wilson. So let's just walk around and see some of the things he did. These are watercolors. All of them are watercolors. This was roughly from Oak Street, down by the river. He was sitting on the bluff, and he was watching what was happening in the bay. This at the time would have been called Boston Bay. Today it's Quincy's Bay. And then here you can see what he saw from that same location, but just turning a little bit to the south. The railroad station at about 2nd and Broadway, featuring the railroad, the station at the time, also the boats that were operating on the river at the time. There was an exchange, obviously, of material that would come to Quincy and put on the rails to be distributed both south, mainly south, and also west as the development of the rails was continuing to the west. It was interesting that the development of the rails was actually by another Quincyan, and that was Stephen Douglas, who was a U.S. Senator and had known Edward Everett when he got to Quincy in 1840. Douglas got to Quincy in February of 1841, so they're both fairly new, both about the same age. And where Edward Everett was interested in the commercial aspects, Douglas also was interested in commerce, but more interested in the expansion of the nation. Part of the reason, one of the main reasons for the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was to provide access to easements and rights-of-way for rails, which Douglas believed would connect the nation, bind the nation together. So anyway, Douglas would become acquainted with Everett also because Douglas was the attaché for General Hardin during the Mormon Wars, when Hardin came and stopped the Mormon Wars in 1845.
I do want to stop here at this window and show you the view from the History Museum here because it's quite a nice one. Right out into the river, right out into the bridge.
Yes, and where you see the white of the building farthest on what would be the north side of the street, that's the area in which Edward Everett's mechanical and engineering business was located.
Wow. All right. Go ahead and ask questions if you have them, by the way, guys. We have quite an opportunity with an expert today.
This is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibit. During the Civil War, Dr. Samuel Everett, who was Edward Everett's brother, was with Benjamin Prentiss, who was a general at the Battle of Shiloh. Prentiss happened to be from Quincy, so the Everetts knew the Prentisses quite well. Dr. Samuel Everett was the brigade surgeon attached to General Prentiss's 6th Division at Shiloh. That battle actually started, it was a 2-day battle, it started on October 6th of 1862. And on the morning of that April 6th, on that early morning, which was a Sunday, Dr. Everett was killed. He was hit in the head and hit once in the body, and they thought that either shot would have killed him. In any case, a couple of weeks later, Edward Everett learned of his brother's death, went to Tennessee, to Shiloh, which is on the Tennessee River, to find his brother's body, which had been buried under an oak tree. And this is the description of where that body rested if Edward Everett had to come back to rebury it, which he did. And he exhumed the body, and Samuel Everett's body today is buried in Woodland Cemetery, where it's obviously honored along with other veterans who died in wars during this past weekend for Memorial Day. So anyway, one of my favorite pieces is this one, simply because Edward Everett wrote that, drew those little sketches at the bottom to show where the body was buried and how he might exhume it. So.
Great.
Another fascinating thing to me is this is a map that Edward Everett drew by hand in 1857. This was the way the city looked in 1857. From the Mississippi River on the west, all the way to the east side, which at that time you can see it really was not very well developed. The properties were owned on the east side, but not well developed. The development basically went to 12th Street, and the Nevins addition, which occurred in the 1860s, was the first start beyond really 12th Street. My house is right here.
I was going to say, mine's right up at the edge of this map.
Which makes it so interesting. And you can see the additions. Everett did a nice job of indicating who the men responsible for the additions were. You can see, for example, this is the Keyes addition. When John Wood basically owned the south half of Quincy, Willard Keyes, his partner, owned the north half. And so this entire addition was by Willard Keyes on his property.
We
Yes.
can't point here and point at the same
Yes.
time. There's Washington Square. There's where we're at right here.
Right. And you can see here, this is the Edward Everett's property. And he built a house, and we'll take a look at that. I think it's pictured over here. We'll see it because he painted it. But Edward Everett's property, that was 6 acres he had. So he had a fairly large property there. The other buildings, and this is beautiful artwork itself. This is a drawing that Everett did from the cupola of the Lorenzo Bull House, which today is the Women's City Club at 16th and Maine. So you can kind of get a look. Quincy, even in 1857, really well developed, and you can see the commercial area of the city in 1857.
Are any of these still standing?
No.
No. Yeah.
None is. That's the Quincy House. That burned down in the 1840s, I believe it was. It was built and owned by John Tilson until he sold it to the state of Illinois. This is the Methodist Seminary, which is gone. This was John Wood's final home, the Octagon Mansion, which he did build. He started in 1857, and it was finished a couple of years later.
So it was brand new when this map was made.
Yes.
Very cool. Oh,
So let's take a look, find his house here. This was the house that his father built. It was at 12th and Elm. If you know the Dairy Queen on 12th Street, this house was located just barely south of that. And it was located on 6 acres. The Everetts actually were in the retail business, but it was a very active and profitable business. And they liked the idea. It was kind of separated from the city, being that far out at the time when they built it. He built it in 1843, I believe it was. Might have been 1842. But it was located farther outside the city, and he liked the privacy of the lot. And you'll notice it had fencing around it, a wood fence. But anyway, that was the Edward Everett home. Edward Everett is the actual second cousin of the Edward Everett of Gettysburg fame. Edward Everett, who's much more well known, was the first speaker at Gettysburg during the dedication of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. He was president of Harvard. He had been well educated, had a PhD and so on. But he spoke for about 2 hours. Abraham Lincoln went to the podium right after Everett finished and spent about 2.5 minutes giving the Gettysburg Address. And Edward Everett's statement was, "You said in 2 minutes more than I could have possibly said in 2 hours." So he very much appreciated Lincoln. But our Edward Everett from Quincy is the second cousin of the more famous Edward Everett of Lincoln's day.
and I'm getting, they're watercolors or watercolors and with acrylic?
These are watercolors. I might say that he was so well recognized for his watercoloring that he was known as a practitioner of the Hudson River School of Art. He probably had no idea that that's what it was, but later on that school recognized him, and there are several honors given to Edward Everett for his artwork. You can kind of sense the detail in watercolor that he was able to achieve. He was named one of the best Hudson River School of Artists of the period, so he did achieve fame, although he probably didn't know it. This is another view of his house, which we saw. Had a cupola on the top. They could actually see the river from where they were. And this is another print. I did want to show you, let's see if I can find here the detail of the elm. I might point this out. This is the John Sharp property, which is let's see, I think that was south of Quincy. Sharp had Mr. Everett do this painting, and it's highly detailed with animals and livestock, the homes, the outbuildings, and so on and so forth. And there is one other view, if I can find it here.
I think it might be this one over here.
There it is, yeah. So you can kind of see the detail, and even the animals are well done.
That's a south view of the John McSharp farm.
John Sharp.
Yeah. Oh, John Sharp. John Sharp.
Yeah.
Mr. Oh, it's a Mr. It's a,
Yeah.
I'm working on reading, everybody.
And we can see here, Everett actually signed this one. Some of them he signed, some of them he didn't, but this one is E.E.C. Everett, October of 1850. And here's the one I was thinking about, which is that one.
How many paintings are there in total?
There are 11. 11, yeah. We were really fortunate to find them, which is just a matter of luck. Somebody called us and told us that he had seen these pictures out east. And we made the contact, the society did, and was able to acquire all 11 pictures. So, a couple of things that I want to say. I mentioned he was a member of the Quincy Rifles. Everett is in that picture. As a volunteer rifleman with the Quincy Rifles, as I mentioned earlier, they were part of the group that was sent by Governor Thomas Ford with John Hardin as their commanding officer, to stop the Mormon Wars. There was just a great deal of conflagration going on. And then he's back with John Hardin. This was in 1846. He was back with John Hardin a couple of years later in Texas. He had joined with the 1st Illinois Volunteers, who were sent to Texas to become part of the Mexican War. And he was an actual military guy. He was on what today we call the military police. And he was trying to break up a fight in a bodega, I guess they call it. But anyway, a tavern. And he was shot in the knee, and the doctor said he would be disabled for life. So he wasn't able to actually participate in the war. John Hardin, just a month or two later, was killed at Buena Vista, leading a charge against, he had a couple thousand men, and there were actually 3 units, 2 Illinois and 1 Kentucky. The Kentucky was led by Jefferson Davis. But anyway, the 3 units charged the 20,000. Hardin was killed. After Edward Everett was wounded, he was assigned by Hardin, who knew of his artistry capabilities, assigned by Hardin to start painting pictures of some of the buildings they saw as they were marching along in Texas. At San Antonio, Edward Everett painted this picture. This is what the Alamo looked like in 1847. In 1836, it had been nearly destroyed during the Texas-Mexican War. Texas was trying to achieve independence from Mexico. The Texan-Mexican War occurred. Texas then became a republic. But during that time, Edward Everett drew this picture and then was asked by James Ralston, who was a doctor from Quincy, who happened to be appointed quartermaster of that same division in Texas, asked him to complete the picture and help supervise the reconstruction of the Alamo. And Edward Everett did that. And so the Alamo that people are so fond of seeing today was actually redesigned and rebuilt by Edward Everett and his team of soldiers in the late 1840s.
Get a little closer here. Nope, that was a glare. Very neat. Anybody have any questions for Reg? As we're going here, please ask them in the comments if you do.
So that's our Edward Everett, Quincy. He was actually baptized by his second cousin, who was a minister, Edward Everett. Everett was born in London. His dad was a retailer there. And, obviously, this was in 1818, that's when Everett was born. But they were learning about the tremendously growing population in the northern part of the northern section of the country, which at that time existed up to about the Mississippi River right out here. So we were on the frontier. But anyway, he decided that he could come here and make some profit selling to pioneers who were going west. And many pioneers would come with nothing. arrive at Quincy, they would buy wagons from people like Knapheide, which started in 1848, buy stoves from people like Comstock Castle, that started in 1838, and of course buy supplies from people like Charles Everett, Edward's dad, and then head west. And so Quincy was right, kind of, it's at the bulge of Illinois, and it was right at the bulge of pioneering in the 1840s. And of course, Quincy sent Stephen Douglas to Congress in 1843, whose whole goal was to organize the West, which he did. And I'm happy to say that I finished my second book, which talks about that from Quincy and the organization of the West by Stephen Douglas. And it certainly was not easy.
Well, I want to thank Reg for taking us through and Lynn for taking us through the stained glass gallery. We appreciate this. If you guys have further questions, definitely write them in the comments and we'll try to follow up. As the History Museum reopens, we will also keep you abreast of that information. If you haven't had the chance to come up and see the second floor, I highly, highly recommend it. I'm endlessly fascinated by the knowledge of the people who work here or work and volunteer around this place, and it's certainly something great to see.
I do have one thing I'd like to say.
No, yeah.
Very short. Please do come up and take some time to look at the interactive room and the wonderful interactive video. I think we have about an hour and a half worth of stories in that video, and they go everything. There's everything from the Washington Theater to the Richter Bank to the events that happened in the park and the Hotel Quincy, and one of my favorite stories about them demonstrating a marvelous new fire escape mechanism down the side of the Hotel Quincy, and a woman coming out of a window in the demonstration with her child and panicking and getting her skirt caught and dropping the child and going back in the window. And it was only at the end of the demonstration that they found that was actually a fireman dressed as a woman to show the safety of the fire mechanism. And we have the patent for the mechanism, and we know how it worked. We don't have the Hotel Quincy to show you anymore. But those are the kind of stories that are in that interactive video, and it really is a delight.
Very cool. What a story. That's really what the Historical Society of Quincy and Adams County does, is preserve these stories, passes them on, and is quite a mission, and we really love hearing about it. In the comments, you've already seen there are phone numbers for the museum, for the Historical Society, which is easy to remember, 222-1835. Why is it 1835, everybody?
John Wood's home was built that year.
John Wood's home was built that year. This is the only reason I can remember the dates.
And the museum here is 214-1888.
Oh.
Because the Free Public Library and Reading Room was built in 1888.
Well, see, just learned something new. Keep checking out our tours. They will always be on Tuesdays at 10. We got lots more coming. Next week we will be featuring, in fact, I can show you what we'll be featuring from this window. Oh, no, too many trees. The next tour will be Jim Lawrence at the Historic Washington Theater. We'll talk about the future of that building next Tuesday at 10, so we sure hope you can join us here on Arts Quincy. For now, this is Laura Siebert, Reg Ankrum, and Miss Lynn Snyder saying have a terrific Tuesday, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.